place I've lived in, and it's currently under threat, but I'll talk about that at the end.
My home for 20 years.
But it will be, my other hat is as grant officer for Lady Gould's charity. And if we dwell on this ordnance survey map from 1863 for a short while, you'll see actually that the Shepherd's Cottage has been highlighted in red. That's on the Highgate side of the High Street. High Street is that great flow in between to go through the middle of the map. And on the Camden side, which is the left-hand side, you'll see where it says Bisham House, which is now where Bisham Gardens is. But Bisham House, set back from the High Street, but actually wasn't demolished until the late 19th century. But Bisham House was the home of Lady Elizabeth Gould. She was born as Elizabeth Gower, but that was the family home. And the three houses on the High Street with the very long gardens next to Bisham House, just up from Bisham House, are numbers 17, 19 and 21 Highgate High Street. And in 1691, Elizabeth Gould said that if there was no issue to her as a result of her marriage, she wanted a part of her estate to be put to use for those in need in Highgate. And that charity has been running, that was in 1691, and the charity is still giving out grants to people in need in Highgate. But the money that fills the coffers for those grants come from the rents of the Lady Gould estate, which is 17, 19 and 21 Highgate High Street. And just another thing while the map is up, is you can see that Pond Square no longer has its pond. So this is 1863. Just behind the cottage, the red dot, you can see that Townsend, who built number 42 for himself, who was a builder on the corner of Townsend Yard, that is, who was a builder and a salvager, who actually was the person who pulled down Ashurst House before where St Michael's Church is now sits. He has started the landscaping of the area out the back, and just behind the red square you can see a line which is a strange boundary wall which runs down to the bottom of the garden of the cottage, where what is now also known as the Folly sits. And the Folly, but I'll talk about that more later. So that's why this is really a tale of three properties, but principally about the Shepherd's Cottage. So Catherine, as Catherine said, ordinary people, we call it the Shepherd's Cottage. This is much of what I will say is local law. Very little is actually written about the person who occupied this cottage. We called him the Shepherd's Cottage, but it might actually be more accurate to call him a local drover or a grazier, because I did one of those checks on Oliver Twist, on Dicky's Oliver Twist. And in fact, the name Shepherd comes up only twice, whereas grazier and drover comes up far more frequently, as does countryman, that kind of thing. So if we can go to the next one, please. So this is Bisham House, actually from the back, where Lady Gould's family lived. That was actually sitting in Highgate Village. Seems astonishing now to imagine, until I think it was the 1880s it was demolished. And actually also this print was made because the resident at the time was Captain Hayward, who was famous for being a midshipman during the mutiny on the Bounty. So this is the cottage, a photograph taken by Ian Henries, which was just over a year ago, before construction began on Townsend Yard. And this is the aspect and the view and the setting of the cottage that is treasured by Highgate Village. And also the road that you see behind, that is the backs of the High Street. So these are the backlands. And before that wall went in, as I just actually pointed out on the Ordnance Survey map, the wall that's behind these two lime trees, the cottage, when it was the Shepherd's Cottage or the Grazier's Cottage or the Drover's Cottage, whatever you want to call it, would have had access to Townsend Yard and the Highgate Bowl, which is this great natural auditorium behind the High Street, where when the animals were brought down the Old North Road, that's where they were fattened and where they would have a full bite of grass. The cottage has been represented often, and this is by John Gay, probably in the 1970s we think, And there are now 40-odd thousand photographs by John Gay in the collection of Historic England, but he captures many aspects of Highgate Village, and particularly Highgate Cemetery as well. This is the cottage into the 1980s, and next one. This article appeared in the Hornsey Journal in 1980, and you'll see it says at first in saving the borough's old face. In fact, what it goes on to say is that Gavin Clark, who was a visionary planner at the time, he was salvaging material for use on other historic buildings in the borough. So if old properties were demolished, he was then salvaging them, and they were being stored in Ali Pali, of all places. This is a drawing of the cottage, a pen and ink drawing from 2010. Somebody came across this. I didn't know this was happening at the time. I lived in the cottage since 2001. But you can see people have just been continually drawn to the cottage. So I should have said 3 properties and a yard. This is Townsend Yard. On the Haringey side of Highgate Village, there are several yards. There's White Lion Yard, Kent's Cottages, which were also a kind of yard, Townsend Yard, Broadbent Yard, Duke's Head Yard. On the Camden side we have Bullen and Angel Yard, but they were all these interconnecting yards and courts through which people navigated and got down to the Highgate Bowl. All of them, except for Townsend Yard, until relatively recently, have been closed up and filled in. So this painting appears in a book from 1907, and it's called The Skirts of the Great City, but this is captured a bit of old Highgate. And here you'll see the wooden structure, which is the row that we just saw of 17th century wooden houses that ran down the yard from that point, with the views out to the north and east. This is all north facing. Again. And next one, please. I'm hoping this comes up clearly enough. But what I wanted to put this one in for was because of the projecting ladder. And next one, please. So this is Jack Foster, the water seller's cottage, and also very much a part of, yes, we'll have that to read that. Can you read that? Anybody read that? So Jack Foster, the water seller, this was one of 36 views of Highgate after drawings and photographs from 1769 to 1905, to go back to the previous one, by W. West, who was a printer, and this collection of 36 views are in the British Museum. But Townsend Yard at the time, in the Highgate Bowl, up until the 19th century, was characterised by incremental building, and the backlands and all of the people who serviced the village. It was the backlands that actually helped an old Middlesex village run. So it's very unusual to have backlands in what's now an urban village, in a London village. I mentioned the folly that's at the end of the cottage garden. The only place you can see the folly properly is from Broadbent Close, so that's the next yard along. But the reason for showing this shot is that you can see it's 2-storey, because when Townsend actually, he landscaped, probably was the first person to actually intervene in the bowl, which was a bowl shape, so you now have Townsend Yard on 2 levels. But this is thought to have been made up out of random rubble and elements from Ashurst House when it was demolished to make way for St Michael's Church. And actually we heard this morning that apparently the undercroft of St Michael's Church is full of rubble, and the suggestion being that a lot of it might still be the remains of Ashurst House, which is really fascinating. This is Broadbent Yard again, so these are the ladder makers of Broadbent Yard, and you'll see some very, very tall ladders. I mean, ladders of all different heights and sizes. And the reason for showing this is that the 17th century houses, and it's my theory, which I can't, it's a theory, is that the shepherd's cottage started out as a wooden house that was then then actually wrapped around in brick. And we'll come to photographs where you can see why I might think that, but the way the staircase is configured, it looks as if the staircase, which could have been put in the 18th century, it does appear that access between floors would have been via ladders. This says J. Townsend. It's spelled, Townsend spelled with an H, Cooper's Arms, Highgate, and it's one of several mugs that were actually dug out, pewter mugs that were dug out of, and I'm not sure if it was a well or a midden, but if we go on to the next one please, of Salisbury House, which is in Bullen's Yard, almost dead opposite Townsend Yard. So just in front of the red, to the side of the red front door, there's a well, and a Roman pavement was found at the bottom of that well, and that had been filled in, and that's where these several mugs, all with people's names engraved on them, and the pubs that they attended were found. This is Sammy Andrews from 1949, and I put this in because this is also to suggest, I'll come to it later actually, the time when the drovers and the bringing down of the animals down through Highgate Village on the way to Smithfield may have stopped. But the land, after it was no longer being used as for grazing and graziers, became nursery land. And Sammy was quite a character. And if we go on to the next one, and there's this, well, you can see a Cinderella export plan. Sammy's adage was, I don't hold with gaiety, you can learn everything you want from nature. And those giant pumpkins, he had been carving biblical texts on them. So, these images of drovers are clearly incredibly cleansed. They can't possibly have looked like that, but here's a Sheffield and Smithfield drover from the book The Costumes of Great Britain, 1808. But as you can see, there's no din, there's no stench, there's no reek, no filth or mire. But there's the drover's attire, felt hat, well garnished with turnpike tickets, no doubt, but on the other side because you can't see them. But when the drovers brought the animals down the Old North Road, they would then be fattened and get their health back after their long, arduous drive down. And that's when the local drovers would have taken over, the local graziers and drovers, which we think lived in the shepherd's cottage. I put this one in really just because it's a bit of a joke, because it's a rather rakish drover. But in both those prints, they're wearing the drover's badge on their arm. Drovers had to be licensed. And these metal badges, they were stamped with the armorial bearings of the City of London and their licence number. So this is Smithfield, which really I think must have been pretty horrendous. And I'm going to read, I hope I've got time, but a full quote from Oliver Twist. Countrymen, butchers, drovers, hawkers, boys, thieves, idlers, and vagabonds of every low grade were mingled together in a mass. The whistling of drovers, the barking dogs, the bellowing and plunging of the oxen, the bleating of sheep, the grunting and squeaking of pigs, the cries of hawkers, the shouts, oaths and quarrelling on all sides, the ringing of bells and roar of voices that issue from every public house, the crowding, pushing, driving, beating, whooping and yelling, the hideous and discordant din that resounded from every corner of the market, and the unwashed, unshaven, squalid and dirty figures constantly running to and fro and bursting in and out of the throng, rendered it a stunning and bewildering scene which quite confounded the senses. Now, although Highgate was not a market, can you imagine that there must have been something very similar running through Highgate High Street several times a week when droving was in full throttle, and sometimes hers could be up to 200 in size. So this, I believe, this shop was given to me by Michael Hammerson, and I think it was 1926, definitely the 1920s, so it's in North Road in Highgate. Whether the sheep are being driven to market, we don't know. Somebody has suggested that they might be going to Hampstead Heath. But the point is that flocks in the 1920s were still being driven through Highgate. I put this in because this is actually Highbury, and slaughterhouses moved. Smithfield was eventually closed down, and the slaughterhouses moved to Caledonian Market in 1885. And these are cattle layers, and I like it because it could be Highgate. I don't know of anything like this for Highgate, but you have the backs of the houses, clearly again they're backlands of a kind, and the animals are being kept in quite close proximity to where people live. Changes to agriculture and, land became enclosures started taking place, and then shipping and trains became carriers for animals. But this shop, again, you see, this is Don McCullen, and this is the 1960s. This is Caledonian Market in the 1960s. So it's all quite much closer to our time than you might imagine. This is a still of the cottage, actually taken from a drone. And it's a film that was made by Peter Walton for the Highgate Neighbourhood Forum, really as a call out and alarm for the danger that the cottage is now exposed to. The cottage was there before Highgate High Street was built, and this is the passageway down to the front door of the cottage. As you can see, it's very narrow. And then, when you get to the end, it opens up in a tiny yard with a bit of a sky to be seen. The cottage, this is one room deep, so what you see is the front door open and the back door open. So it's one room deep over 4 floors, never extended, which is very rare. When you come in straight into the ground floor, you'll see the narrow stair that starts wrapping up on one side, which is where I say I can imagine a ladder could have been the way between the floors, a long tall ladder. Again, that's up to the first floor and then up to the top floor, so that's the 3 floors. When I moved in, this is some remnants of hand-block printed paper I found. It's actually a very nice blue. I don't know why it's not coming out of blue there. But then you can also see there's a piece of newspaper, and this is the Weekly Dispatch from 1828, which is backed with Hessian. Weekly Dispatch. The Edinburgh London steam packet. And the cottage has always been mended. There's a lead patch on the old floorboards. Here, this is in the passageway that you just saw. When Fisher and Spur, the antiquarian bookshop, closed in the 1990s, all of the bookshelves were brought out, and I took home many of them and wrapped around one room, which is now completely floor-to-ceiling lined with books. But the reason I like this is because they were made of banana crates, Elders and Fifes bananas, because of the shortage of wood after the war.
Jane, 3 minutes, if you would.
3 minutes. Okay. Well, let's just keep looking at the slides then. So here, this is the byre where the shepherd kept his sheep. So the ceiling, if you do the next one, the ceiling is a single plank floor with a room above, so the heat from the animals' bodies could rise up. And you'll see the hatch. If you go back, you'll see the hatch just above that staircase, which is where a ladder would have come down into the byre. That's the coal slope or fee slope down into the byre, into the lower ground. We had a lot of conservation work done and I published an article called in the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings magazine. This is the conservation work we had done on the East Gable, which I'm very proud of. I think it's now a thing of beauty. This shows you, this is the random bond for the cottage. Most buildings would have had a regular bond, but the colours are just beautiful. A chimney pot that I commissioned because one couldn't be put back. This was made, there was an exhibition of ceramics at Onveg Gardens, and one of the potter, Joseph Lubkin, I believe his name is, he works with wild clay. He calls this wild clay jar, and he dug up blue clay in Onveg Gardens. Now blue, if clay is blue, he found a seam of blue clay. If it's blue, it means it's never been oxidised. It means that nothing has ever, the ground has ever been turned over, nothing has ever been built there. And that is incredibly rare. He made this pot. And again, this is another thing that the Victorians throw away. There was also dug out a whole lot of old silver spoons, all bent, and he used one of the spoons for the lid. So, this is Townsend Yard. Highgate tree protectors have helped me to prevent the felling of two lime trees. 3 trees were lost, these 3, unfortunately, but this is what the yard looked like up until August the 18th of last year. This stretch of old wall was demolished, nothing was salvaged, and it's now completely open. There's Jane Leggett sitting on my garden wall, and those are the lime trees. This is what the scheme intends. So the cottage will be completely obliterated from view. It will deprive the cottage of light completely. It's a completely north-facing building as it is. And we are trying to keep the top of the yard open, have at least just one of these houses removed from this scheme so that the fire services can get to the cottage. And this is, well, my pay-in to the cottage, and another photographer, Mark Crick, who literally took this a month ago, this photograph. As I say, people are drawn to the cottage, but we have a petition, and please do sign and share it.